Today we will be looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Catherine Hambrick, better known as Kate, was born on the 16th of July 1856 in Pickens County in the state of Georgia. Her parents owned a modest but successful farm, which allowed the family to live comfortably, even though they were not considered to be particularly wealthy. Growing up in rural Georgia, she experienced life on the farm, helping with daily chores and learning the values of hard work and self-sufficiency. Although her father's relatively stable financial position provided Kate with a sense of security and some luxuries, the family occasionally experienced financial troubles. She attended school, where she learned reading, writing and arithmetic, subjects considered essential for all children. However, her educational opportunities were limited compared to her brothers, which reflected the social norms of the time. The Hambrick farm was next door to a farm owned by Mr. William Southern and his wife Elizabeth, a couple who were moderately situated, but who worked hard to try and improve their situation. By 1874, Mrs. Southern had given birth to 11 children, 7 boys and 4 girls, 10 of who survived infancy. One, named Robert, but affectionately known as Bob, was born on the 1st of July 1856 and had grown into a strong and handsome young man who was very much admired by the young ladies in the area. It was not only his looks, he was also very charming and possessed a friendly, captivating demeanour that made him well liked by everyone in the community. Being just 2 weeks older than Kate and living on a neighbouring farm, Bob often found himself in her company. Their close friendship led many to remark on how well suited they seemed. Kate blossomed into a lovely young woman with a slender figure, brown eyes and auburn hair. However, Bob was frequently seen with another young lady named Narcissa Cowart. She was very graceful in her appearance and, unlike Kate, was from one of the wealthiest families in Pickens County. Although for a long time the local people had believed that Bob would marry Kate, Narcissa had recently separated from her husband and had a reputation for being a young lady who was both manipulative and reckless. Her scandalous behaviour and tendency to incite trouble caused the community to speculate about the true nature of hers and Bob's relationship. This doubt was finally ended when Bob proposed to Kate, and she happily accepted. For the next few months, the talk of Pickens County revolved around the wedding. It was a grand affair, and both the bride and groom appeared to be very happy. Following the wedding, they settled into their new home, and people would often comment on how well suited they were. However, not long after, Bob began to come home late, without offering any explanations for his absences. Kate began to worry, and when she asked her husband where he had been, his answers were always evasive. Soon unsettling rumours spread that Bob was still meeting with Narcissa. According to the gossip, they had been seen walking together in the woods multiple times since the wedding. Kate, already feeling uneasy, now worried about the state of her marriage. She wondered what to do and found it difficult to ignore the whispers and maintain her trust in her husband. The happiness they once shared now seemed overshadowed by suspicion and uncertainty. At Christmas in 1876, Kate's father organised a festive party at his house, inviting the people of Pickens County to celebrate the holiday season. True to the local tradition of generous hospitality, he invited Narcissa and her parents, who believed that they would be going to the party, so all the rumours regarding Narcissa and Bob could be extinguished, and that Bob would put on a public display of affection towards his wife. Although an invitation had been extended to Narcissa's family, it did not sit well with Kate. She was already feeling humiliated and embarrassed by the rumours circulating about her husband's secret relationship with a young lady she did not care for. She pleaded with Bob not to embarrass her further at the party and asked him not to dance or pay any attention to Narcissa, who he had been seen out with on a number of occasions. However, when the day of the party arrived, her efforts to prevent an awkward situation were ignored. As the evening progressed and music filled the room, Kate's worst fears came true. She watched in dismay as Bob led Narcissa to the centre of the room, and in front of all the guests, they began to dance. Kate quickly tried to defuse the situation. She approached them and gently reminded her husband that he had promised this dance to her. Strangely, Narcissa started to argue with Kate and told her that it was only one dance and that she should not get so worried. Angry and frustrated, Kate went and sat at the side of the room. When it was time for the next dance, Bob approached his wife and asked her to join him. She shook her head, refusing his offer. She was very upset by what he had done and by Narcissa's harsh words that were still fresh in her mind. While the pair looked at each other, seemingly unable to sort out their differences, Narcissa grabbed Bob by the arm and declared that he could dance with her instead. As she pulled him away, he looked back at Kate, his expression a sort of mixture of regret and confusion. By now, Kate felt very humiliated. As she watched her husband dance, her sense of betrayal deepened. She was quiet, and her face grew pale. She felt like an outsider in a room that was full of friends and neighbours. She got up and approached her father. She asked him if she could borrow his pocket knife, explaining that she wanted to cut her fingernails. Although Mr. Hamrick found this request odd, he handed her the knife. But what happened next was shocking and unforeseen. Kate opened the blades and discreetly concealed it in her dress. When the dance ended, Kate approached Narcissa and, catching her by the arm, she quietly said, "You have danced enough," before pulling out the knife and plunging it into her chest. Narcissa staggered back as blood gushed from the wound. Fueled by rage, Kate then sprang forward, grabbed Narcissa by the hair and cut her throat. Narcissa collapsed to the floor. She was dead. The room descended into chaos. Gasps and screams filled the air as a horrific scene unfolded. One of the guests, named Mr. Hooley, looked at Narcissa's lifeless body on the floor and shouted, "Who is responsible for this?" The petite figure of Kate then came forward and declared in a steady and unrepentant voice, "I am the one who did it, and I don't regret it." Acting quickly, Mr. Hooley dashed to the door and locked it. He then said that no one can leave until the matter had been investigated and the guilty parties arrested. Bob Southern had been silent and just been watching the crowd, but now with a grim expression, he drew his pistol and took Kate's hand before shouting in a commanding tone, "Gentlemen, I am leaving this house with my wife, and I intend to do so with or without your permission. If necessary, I'll shoot my way through." There was a stunned silence as the guests absorbed the seriousness of his words. Although there was much tension, no one tried to stop them. Instead, Bob and Kate pushed past the bewildered guests and made their way to the door. As they stepped into the night, they were joined by Bob's father William and his brothers James and Miles. They then all fled, leaving behind the confusion and turmoil of the evening. They headed north, determined to make a fresh start away from Pickens County. It was with much disbelief that the authorities learnt that the Southerns had left town without being pursued. No one could even tell them in which direction they had gone. A search party was sent to look for them, but Bob and Kate, along with Bob's father and two brothers, could not be found. A substantial reward for their apprehension was offered by both the family of the murdered young lady and the governor of Georgia. However, despite the generous incentives, they continued to evade capture, and a year later, they had still not been found. In February 1878, W. Finley, a private detective and former sheriff of Pickens County, received a tip that Bob and Kate Southern, along with Bob's father and brothers, had been spotted in the town of Franklin in North Carolina. It had been reported that the five of them had inquired about settling on a farm in the area. Convinced that the Southerns were indeed in Franklin, Mr. Finley gathered 3 men and travelled there with the intention of arresting the fugitives and returning them to Georgia. However, when he arrived at the farm where he believed they would be, he was informed that the occupants had left a few days earlier. He made more inquiries and discovered that the Southerns were travelling by ox carts, a particularly slow form of transport, which made it easier for him and his team to catch them up. When they finally located the carts, Bob and Kate had stopped to camp for the night. So with his men strategically positioned around the wagon, Mr. Finley approached Bob, introduced himself, and informed him that he would be taking both him and his wife back to Pickens County. There was no gunfire, and Bob just nodded his head. But Mr. Finley was somewhat taken aback as he discovered that Kate was holding a small baby. It could not have been more than a few months old. None of the 5 resisted arrest. In fact, there seemed to be a sense of resignation in their demeanour, as if the prospect of finally ending their fugitive life brought a measure of relief. As news of the capture reached Pickens County, local people gathered in quiet anticipation, curious about the return of the fugitives. Some were still horrified by the brutality of Kate's actions on that December night in 1876. They were taken to the local jail, and it was agreed that Bob and Kate could stay together in a cell with their baby. Bob's father and 2 brothers were released, but Bob was held on minor offences. Meanwhile, Kate was charged with first-degree murder, and her trial was scheduled for May 1878. There was much interest in the trial, and newspapers filled their pages with detailed accounts of the proceedings. The extensive coverage provided readers with comprehensive updates on every aspect of the case, ensuring that they could all stay well informed. The constant flow of information kept the trial at the centre of the public's attention and highlighted the complexities of a case that seemed to have fascinated everyone in Georgia. Kate had pleaded not guilty and sat through the proceedings with a baby on her lap. Despite her denial, proving her guilt was not going to be difficult for the prosecution, as Kate had committed the murder at a Christmas party in front of many witnesses. The defence tried to paint a picture of a troubled soul. They argued that Mrs. Southern's husband had been involved in a relationship with Miss Cowart before marrying Kate, and continued to maintain an inappropriate friendship after the wedding. This ongoing relationship, they claimed, filled Kate with jealousy and sorrow due to the repeated slights and insults she endured. On the day of the murder, they said that Mr. Southern's behaviour was particularly appalling, as he danced with Miss Cowart at the party, subjecting his wife to immense mental anguish in front of many residents of Pickens County. They claimed that she had been driven to the brink of madness by jealousy and despair, and acted in a moment of unbalanced rage, emphasising that there was no premeditation, and that her actions were a spontaneous outburst of a woman whose happiness had been systematically destroyed by another woman's intentions to steal her husband. The prosecution, however, focused solely on the events of the night in question. They provided a clear factual account of the murder without offering any personal opinions or conjecture. This approach left the defence with little room to manoeuvre, without witnesses to support their arguments that Kate was in a state of significant emotional turmoil due to the alleged provocations by her husband and Miss Cowart. The defence's interpretation of the events that led up to this terrible crime seemed weak and unsubstantiated. The trial concluded once all the testimonials were presented and closing arguments had been made. The jury retired, and after a lengthy deliberation, finally reached a verdict. As they filed back in and took their seats, the courtroom was packed, with every available space filled by anxious onlookers. The gallery fell silent, and everyone seemed to be alternating their gazes between the jury and the defendant. The jury foreman was then asked for the verdict, and in a calm and assured voice, he declared that they found the defendant, Mrs. Kate Southern, guilty. As Kate heard the verdict, her face became pale, and her hands began to tremble. Her eyes also widened in shock and disbelief. Murmurs and whispers echoed through the gallery. Some people exchanged glances of surprise, while others shook their heads in astonishment. A few moments later, Judge Lester called for order, and silence returned to the courtroom. He then turned to Mrs. Southern and sentenced her to death. She would be hanged on the 21st of June. As soon as Kate was escorted back to the prison, the community began to consider the ramifications of the murder and the trial. The fact that a woman was sentenced to be hanged sparked intense curiosity. People questioned whether her crime truly warranted such severe punishment, and many felt that she should be pardoned. It became apparent that there was a growing movement urging the governor to commute her sentence, hoping for a reconsideration of her fate. Newspapers raised concerns about why she was facing the gallows, comparing her situation to that of countless women across the country who endure similar mistreatment from their husbands. The argument was made that the only difference that Kate had taken the law into her own hands to rid herself of her husband's seducer, while most women were made to suffer in silence. Everyone who had known Kate said that she was a good person, devoted to her family and active in church. It was brought to light that she had been in an unbalanced state of mind at the time of the murder, with a doctor confirming that she had in fact suffered 3 epileptic fits on the day before the incident. Additionally, it was revealed that 2 jurors had expressed their support for her execution even before the trial had begun. Support for Kate Southern continued to grow. The widespread outrage was not only expressed by newspapers, but by priests and other respectable members of the community. It was reported that Miss Cowart had been a depraved 25-year-old woman who once married but had been separated from her husband due to her own actions. She became an outcast in her neighbourhood and was known for her desperate temper, violent character and slanderous tongue. She had even attempted to prevent Bob Southern from marrying Kate by spreading scandalous rumours about her. The public's response highlighted a deep-seated dissatisfaction with the severity of the death sentence and fueled mounting pressure on Governor Colquitt to reconsider her fate. As the calls for clemency intensified, the governor faced increasing scrutiny and appeals from both the community and prominent figures in the area. After a careful and thoughtful deliberation, he decided to intervene and announced that Kate Southern would be spared the death penalty, which had originally been set for the 21st of June. Instead, he commuted her sentence to 10 years in prison. This decision was seen as a compromise that acknowledged the public's concerns, while still holding her accountable for her actions. Kate served some time in prison, but was released early and placed in work in a private home. This was often done in the 1880s to reduce prison overcrowding and aid rehabilitation. This practice was influenced by the era's focus on prison labour and moral reform, with domestic service seen as a way to reintegrate women into society under supervised placements. When she was finally released, she and Bob went on to have 5 more children. She died on the 15th of February 1927 at the age of 70. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case.